Welcome back to episode 3 of Miller's Movers. This week, as well as the Handicap Movers and Shakers feature, we've got a quick look at the weekend action that's just been. We're really into the national hunt season now, with both Cheltenham and Aintree getting their first winter cards over and done with. We've also got an interview with Robbie Llewlyn, a trainer who made a really big splash last year. Plenty of winners in just his second season. Now going into his third season, he's going to tell me about his slight change of direction with the type of horse he's training this year, and how he finds all the races for those very many winners that he had last year. But first, I think we ought to touch on the weekend's racing at Cheltenham and Aintree. Plenty of good action from Cheltenham, which was slightly dominated by the Irish Raiders. Plenty on my social media feed seem to take that as a real worrying sign of the imbalance between Ireland and the UK. I'm not so sure. I think if you look back last year, it was pretty much the same at this meeting. Horses coming from Ireland that had perhaps had the benefits of runs through the summer, and they did dominate as they did this year. But I would point out that Paul Nicholls and Nicky Henderson, between them this weekend, had just 8 runners across the 2 days at Cheltenham. Just 2 for Paul Nicholls, 6 for Nicky Henderson. Wouldn't be worrying just yet. I'm sure when we get to the spring festivals, again, the Irish are going to dominate. They've clearly got the best horsepower. But through the mid part of the season, I wouldn't be too concerned, unless, of course, we see plenty of horse boxes leaving Close Sutton and coming over to raid regularly through the winter. The Cheltenham form, generally, I'm going to take a view to oppose this weekend's form. If you look back historically, last year from the handicaps, there were just 2 winners. Molescourt, who won the Amateur Chase handicap last year, he eventually won a second race of the season, but that didn't come till April. And Our Champ, who won the Conditional Jockeys handicap hurdle, which closes the Friday, he eventually got a win in March. The rest of the handicap winners went winless throughout the rest of the season. I expect that to be a theme that will carry on this year. And then when you look to the graded races, last year, Butch, who won the 3-mile novice hurdle, he had a pretty good season, winning a couple of times. Blooking Daru, who won the Masterson hurdle, he managed another win. But other than that, horses went winless throughout the rest of the season. Tends to be that trainers perhaps target October meeting at Cheltenham, and that's the horses' Gold Cup. So I'm going to take the view pretty much that the winners from Cheltenham I'm going to be against, and we'll perhaps hit on that in some of the movers and shakers. Sunday saw the return of Aintree. Their big race there was the Old Roan Chase, won by Manila Drama, and I think you'd have to be pretty stone-hearted not to like to see that horse win. He's been a real tenacious little horse, always runs consistently. He was second last year, went back on better terms this year. It's lower in the handicap, and duly made pretty much all the running. Wasn't always particularly fluent over his fences, but he kept finding. Hitman, on the other hand, who finished runner-up, he got an absolute flyer at the last fence under Freddie Ginger, who rode him really nicely. Looked like he was going to land running and pick up Manila Drama in the closing stages, but as is becoming his way, he slightly looked to down tools, didn't look all that enthusiastic about going past. He weakened into second. He's the sort of horse that I think can hit the frame consistently throughout the season, so if he gets to a good price, he's never a bad each way bet, but you certainly don't really ever have much faith in that he's going to go past and win. I suppose the slight disappointment of the race was Stage Star. He should have had his ground conditions, and it's just a little bit of a question as to whether he had a little bit of work on fitness-wise, or whether he'd been lined up for this race. Paul Nicholls' horses are tending to take a run, but you caveat that by saying Rubo won at Kempton the week before last. You know, he'd been targeted that race and was clearly plenty forward. I was just a little bit concerned to see Stage Star occasionally put down on Harry Cobden, asked for a big stride, chipped in, and he also seemed to me to jump with his head a little bit high. That could just be that the ground that was pretty quick was perhaps a bit too quick for his liking, and he was slightly uncomfortable on it. But I just wonder whether Stage Star made hay in a slightly weak division and is going to get found out this season. He'd certainly be a horse that I'd look to oppose through the season. And then, of course, the big talking point was Ahoy Seigneur, who finished really, really strongly, having looked to get outpaced. Some suggested that maybe he was given too much to do by Derek Fox. I can see where people are coming from with that sort of view, but I think Ahoy Seigneur has consistently been disappointing on his seasonal returns. I think they'll be pleased with this run. I think Derek Fox's primary aim was to get the horse into a jumping rhythm. He reported to the stewards that previously, when being taken on for the lead, Ahoy Seigneur had jumped poorly. When he's jumped poorly, that's given them physical issues they've had to iron out. So I think they wanted to come back from this first run with a horse they can build on. Of course, we have to point out that he is better on a sounder surface. So when the rain comes, he's perhaps a horse to avoid until the spring. But I suggest they might go to the Betfair Chase now. And if the rain stays away, we have a dry autumn into the early winter. It might well be that he's in a better frame of mind this time round than he was this time last season. So starting on Handicap Movers and Shakers now, and the first horse I want to talk about is a horse that ran the Sunday before last at Kempton and won on chase debut, and that's Idy Wood for trainer Jamie Snowden. He ran at Kempton off a mark of 120. He's been put up £5 to a mark of 125, and on the bare form, that might appear to be a little bit harsh, but he travelled very nicely through the race. Going towards 2 out, he was the only horse travelling on the bridle, jumped to the front 2 out, and then had a really good look going down to the last fence. That allowed the closers to get fairly close to him, land from the last, had to be shaken up by Gavin Sheehan, but I think he won with a fair degree in hand. That was over 2 miles, 2 furlongs, so he'll stay a little bit further than that. And then when you look at the pick of his hurdle form, mark of 125 looks lenient. He was just 2 lengths behind Cam Sinas. He won a handicap hurdle off 130 at Aintree this weekend, and he was just 6 lengths behind Lump Sum, who's now got a rating of 141 after winning the Welsh champion hurdle. So I think 125 still underestimates Idy Wood. He jumped really soundly. I think he's best in a race that's run on a strong pace, coming from behind, getting a lead down to the last, and he's a horse that I'll certainly be keen to follow throughout the season. Another horse that won on chase debut was the Alan King trained Manio. He's gone up £4 to a mark of 126 after making a successful chase debut at Plumpton, where he beat the solid horse Warlord by 9 lengths. He was receiving a little bit of weight, but I think his performance suggests he can go on from this. Warlord perhaps isn't quite as robust in a finish as he used to be, and once Manio got alongside him, he was able to clear away quite nicely. But I would caveat that by saying that Warlord did get the run of the race. He was able to make his own running, got into a really good jumping rhythm, and down the back straight it looked like Manio might have a bit of a job to pick him up, but he duly picked him up the home straight, quickened away really nicely. This was over a trip of 2 mile 4 furlongs, and I think he'll stay further. 2 mile 5 found him out last year, but he was a weak horse. He's only a 5-year-old. I think he looks like he's strengthened up. He took to jumping really well at chase fences, and Manio is a horse for Alan King that I think will go forward, particularly given the fact that Alan King tends to be a trainer that brings his horse along quite slowly. They'll definitely improve for a run, so there might be more yet to come from Manio. Both Idy Wood and Manio made very nice chasing debuts, but the ability they showed pale into insignificance when you look at the chase debut of Johnnywho at Carlisle. The O'Neill-trained, Jason McManus-owned horse was just absolutely fantastic in this chase debut. I'd give it a 9.5 out of 10. He made one fiddly error, but he looked like a horse that's really going places. He's got a mark now of 144. He's up £6, but I think he's value for more than that significantly. The 2 horses that finished in behind him in second and third certainly gave their running. He had them comfortably covered. But the one concern would just perhaps be that he made a very nice novice hurdle debut at the same track last year, and his form tailed off after that. He was 4th in the Cheltenham hurdle. That was run on quite testing ground. He finished quite tired there, and his season seemed to unravel from there on in. Although he was quite highly tried, he ran in the Albert Bartlett at the Cheltenham Festival. I'd like to see the O'Neill team take this horse along fairly slowly, find another little handicap chase, novice handicap chase, maybe even a novice chase, but just away from the big tracks. Let him build a little bit of confidence. He's clearly got a huge engine. He was very well regarded last year, despite the fact that his season slightly fell apart. And I think in Johnnywho, they've potentially got a horse that could take them to some very big targets later in the season, particularly off a mark of 144 in handicaps. Now on to a horse that I think has got the biggest single rise I've ever seen, and that's the Dan Skelton-trained Valgrand. He won the Grade 2 novice hurdle at Cheltenham over the weekend, and he's gone up a whopping £22 to a mark of 140. He clearly was a very well handicapped horse off 118. Visually, he was really impressive at Cheltenham. He jumped very sound. He was given a very positive ride by Harry Skelton, and he quickened up very nicely up the hill. But I'm just going to take a view that I want to see him go and do this again. I'd be keen to oppose this horse on his next start. He's got a mark of 140. Gail Marler, who finished runner-up, she was beaten from some way out. She actually did very well to plug on into second. And the third horse, Dancing in Paris, was making his hurdle debut. So there are just reasons to think that maybe he produced a good performance against a runner-up who underperformed and a horse making its first hurdle start. Perhaps there's not as much substance to the form as you might be first led to believe. And I thought in his interview afterwards, Dan Skelton, who's not frightened to be bullish about his horses, was sort of the view that he would still like to go and see Valgrand do it again. This mark of 140 almost certainly means they're going to have to look to go back to a slightly deeper novice race next time. That will show us more. Visually, he was brilliant, but I'm going to take the view that Valgrand is a horse I'm going to try and oppose on his next start. Two more horses going up in the handicap, both of whom ran at Cheltenham, and two I have a slightly different opinion on. The first is Gimme Five. Now, he won the Maston Hurdle for Harry Derham. I was pleased to see him do it. He was at SBK Nap for the weekend, and he did it in really fine style under a very good ride from Paul O'Brien. The low sun blighted the race. There was hurdles taken out. I thought Paul O'Brien had him brilliantly positioned to run the straightest line home around the bypassed hurdles. The ground clearly suited him against the favourite, who I just don't think enjoyed the ground. But he's up now £3 to a mark of 132. He was clearly well prepared for this weekend. Harry Derham sort of said it was a target from some way out, and there might not be as much physical improvement to come from this horse. He's going to have to go into handicaps now. They've spoken about the Greatwood, but I think he likes a smaller field. When he went to the Irish festivals last year, he didn't give his running in a larger field. I'd be concerned about him in a large field handicap as just a 4-year-old with relative lack of experience. So Gimme Five, much as I like to be loyal to horses that serve me well, he's going to be a horse that I'm going to look to oppose now throughout the rest of his season. And then one final horse that's gone up in the handicap, and I think he's got away with a fairly light rise, and that's Hyland. He won the handicap chase under Nico de Boinville, absolutely scooted away up the hill to win by 15 lengths, giving £5 to Transmission. Now, Transmission's rated 129. I think he's a horse that can make up into a decent chaser this year. Hyland absolutely cleared away from him. He's only gone up £3 for that £15 rise, and if you watched, for that 15 length win, I should say, and if you watched Nico de Boinville's interview afterwards, he certainly looked a bit sheepish. I think he was a bit concerned that he'd won a bit too far, hadn't looked behind and seen quite how far clear he was. He is a horse that's better on a sound surface. It might be that he gets put away for a spring campaign now, but I think a mark of 144, they can count themselves lucky that he only went up £3 for that win, and there might well be a decent pot yet in the spring in Highland, trained by Nicky Henderson. Just two horses this week that caught my eye coming down in the handicap, and they both ran at Cheltenham. The first is Jiliajone, trained by David Pipe. He ran in a conditional jockey's hurdle. It was a very messy race. Inexperienced riders, they all seemed to want to run on the same patch of ground at Cheltenham. Plenty of traffic from pretty much flagful, and he certainly suffered a troubled passage through. He was then positioned quite wide down the hill. As he started to make his run, he drifted in, again got hampered, and then still came with a pretty decent looking challenge up the hill, but his inexperienced jockey struggled to keep him straight up the hill. He ran sort of a long way round to get to the line, eventually fading into fourth, being dropped down £1 to a mark of 118. The ground was probably quick enough for Jilajone. His best form has come on a slower surface. He's certainly going to get that now into November. He's below his last winning mark. I think he's a horse that should go into your tracker. He can definitely pick up a race or two through the winter. And then the final horse coming down in the handicap is the Nigel Swisson-David trained Broadway Boy. He's down £1 now to a mark of 148 from the mark of 149 that he ran off at Cheltenham over the weekend. He was quite well punted for the 3-mile handicap chase, but he got taken on quite early, had to work quite hard to get the lead. And I do think that an uncontested lead for this horse is important. He made some fiddly mistakes, struggled to find a rhythm, and then just had no answer up the hill, probably on ground that was quick enough. They've suggested that his next target will be the Coral Trophy. I would look to oppose him in that. I think a big field will take him out of his rhythm. He won't get an uncontested lead there for certain. It's a race where they tend to go very hard over the first few fences, so I don't see that being a suitable race. But I do think now this mark of 148 coming down that single pound, when we go into the season and we get slower ground, perhaps back at Cheltenham where he seems to be very effective, he is a horse that looks to be on a winning mark, just not for the Coral Trophy, or as we used to call it, the Hennessy. So I'm really excited to be joined by, well, fellow Welshmen. First of all, we like to stick together, and I don't like to use the term, I don't want to embarrass you, Robbie, but I think we have to say you're sort of a rising force in the training ranks, coming into your third season with a full licence, 5 winners first season. I think it was 25 last season. It's clearly going well. You've clearly got a process in place. Are you the sort of guy that sets targets? If so, what's the sort of plan for this season, the target you'd like to get to this year?
I'm not really one to set targets, if I'm honest. Obviously, this season was going to be a lot harder than last season because we weren't going to have as many well handicapped horses coming into the season. And look, we've probably changed the type of horse we bought this summer. Kind of gone down the young horse route, trying to look for those Saturday horses now, which is what we want to progress to, rather than just your normal weekday handicaps. So it's probably going to be a little bit more of a slow burner this season, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of winners coming probably in the new year when they've all had a bit of
Yeah,
experience.
so that was going to bring me on. I mean, last year you were really prolific with taking horses out of other yards, and I think people can sort of be a little bit squeamish about talking about it, but clearly you're looking at horses and you're backing yourself and essentially saying, I think I can do a better job with that horse. Are you looking for certain yards? Are you looking for certain types? What is it that sort of led you to those horses last year?
It's probably just value. We didn't have a lot of money to spend, so then you have to cross your T's and dot your I's and try and look outside the box and why we thought we could improve horses or whether just a different routine, different system. That was probably the main angle. And look, there's plenty of trainers that have to start out in that fashion before they've been able to get going. So it was the only way we were going to be able to do it was to look outside the box to get horses that we thought we could improve and perhaps then a form side change distances, ground, whatever we thought could work slightly differently with those types of horses. And look, being a smaller yard, you'd like to think then you can find different angles. And look, probably my biggest thing is that I've got very good staff at home riding them every day, and that made a massive difference to the horses we were able to buy last season to get them going in a
Yeah, I
different
mean, I
way, I
remember
suppose.
Tom Simmons actually. I think when he took his license out was perhaps the youngest licensed trainer in the country at the time. I remember he said to me that he'd been and seen Aidan O'Brien and was looking for tips, and he said the actual biggest piece of advice wasn't horsemanship or anything like that. He said, don't buy young horses because owners, when you're starting out, don't have quite the patience with a young trainer as they do with an established trainer. So his advice was to buy form horses that you can run regularly. You've clearly done that. You link up with Dan Asprey quite well. Who's a bloodstock agent, I should say. What's the breakdown between you two in terms of, do you give him a list of horses and he sort of checks them off for you, or is it the other way around?
No, we'd work very close together. We'd probably both do a list together, each on our own, and then it's probably the two heads knocking together at the sales that come. And we basically have a list each, and then go right. Where's their value? What's his angle on it? What's my angle on it? And then look, some days I'll be like, come on, we need to go again, and some days he'll be pushing me to go again to buy the horse. But look, Dan's prolific in the way he works. He goes to every sale. He doesn't miss a national hunt or flat sale, and he's back and forth to Ireland and works very hard at his job. And look, he said to me that he'd help me wherever we could, and we've known each other quite a long time through the punter pointing side when he used to work for Ollie Greeno previously, and it just works. We get on very well, and I think our sales approach is probably different because we're both coming from different angles. So that's helped us be able to buy horses probably that there's be some that I wouldn't have bought if it wasn't for Dan, and likewise the other way I probably pushed to buy ones because of that reason. But sometimes it's better having two heads thinking at it
Yeah.
than just one.
And so you sort of said that you think you're going to be a little bit slower this year. That I've sort of noticed. You mean you absolutely hit the ground running last year. I think quite a few trainers are perhaps finding this year that their horses are needing a run to come forward. I'm constantly amazed that that's sort of seen as a negative. To me, sort of the season's very long, and time upon time you see horses that get plenty of winners October, November, and then of course form tails off because, as you stated earlier, it also happens to coincide with perhaps climbing handicap marks. Have you approached the training of them differently this year because you have a different type of horse, or do you just think that because they're lacking experience, it is going to take time?
Yes, we probably look when you have those sort of older form horses, you're able just to get the graft into them, and then that was quite easy last year. We just grafted them, got them as fit as we could, and then came the place. And this year has been a slightly bit slower. Obviously, the ground is still quite quick on our grass gallops and different things, so we haven't been actually able to get out on them this year as much as we were this time last year. And obviously, with the younger horses, you can't push the button quite as soon as you can with those sort of older horses that have been in training a few years and can take the graft as hard. So we have been a little bit slower. It's probably a combination of both. But even sort of the older horses have all taken a run this season. I think the second runs will be a lot better now, but it's nothing we're really worried about. Look, it's a long season. There's a lot more targets later on in the year that we're keen on being at. So it's not all about the early season this year for us. For us, really, to be long term, I didn't want to just be a flash in the pan. So it's trying to get those nicer horses for a Saturday, and it's not all about just banging out plenty of winners at the moment. We just got to find that fine balance to try and get those Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I know in the
horses.
music industry they talk, don't they, about the tricky second album when you've had a really good first album. That the second one is almost the more important one because people are now have a sort of degree of expectancy. So you came through sort of a lot of sort of groundwork with David Brace, who'd be really well grounded in the Welsh point-to-point scene. I think with Evan Williams for a bit. You were then assistant trainer to Tim Vaughan and had a successful time there. I could ask you what you take from each of them, but I thought one of the perhaps more interesting questions was, is there something that since you've been training, you're surprised at how important it is? You sort of underestimated the value of something, and equally, is there something that you perhaps look back now and you're not as over it as you thought? It's not as important as you thought it would be.
I think, like with everything experience, I'm a lot more relaxed about it all these days than probably when you start and you just want to go full on at everything. I was very lucky when I worked for David Brace. I was quite young, but I kind of run the yard from sort of a young age, so I made a lot of mistakes. Not gonna lie, when you're young and in charge of sort of, we had 20 odd point pointers in. I made loads and loads of mistakes then, but hopefully now later on, after going into sort of bigger yards, then with the Welsh scene obviously nowadays is totally different to even when I started riding out as a kid. The Evan Williams, Tim Vaughan, Peter Bowen, Rebecca Curtis, they've all been slamming Grade 1 winners in now for a numerous number of years, and just probably what we were brought into as sort of young kids coming into racing was a slightly different approach. So yes, I understood what it took to train 100 racehorses, and then you saw the logistics of that and what filters down through your staff, feed, bedding, all the little things that come with it. So, look, I've probably taken little things from all of them. They'd be totally different characters. All of the three main people I've worked for in racing, they have total different approach and how they do things, but I'd like to think I've taken little bits from each one of them, even from a business sense as much as just a training sense. But look, it's something that works for us, and obviously we took the big dive to move up the M4 and come into England to train, which wasn't going to be an easy step to take, being from where we're from and what I was used to and where we were used to training.
And what was the drive for that, Robbie? Because obviously all your experience came in Wales. I know myself, as a Welshman with plenty of English friends, it's not easy moving to England, especially with the state of our Welsh rugby team at the moment. That sort of sets you up for plenty of ribbing. What was it about moving to England that you felt was the right decision for you?
So there was nowhere really in Wales I could go and just rent a yard. I wasn't obviously in the position to go and buy my own place to set up, and there wasn't anywhere I could just go and rent a yard with gallops that I thought we could achieve, be able to grow basically. I didn't want to just train 5 or 10 horses and hopefully add a stable on. I thought if we're going to do it, we need to do it properly. So there was just more scope. Obviously, my wife Sarah is from Salisbury as well, so that probably had a little bit of inkling for us to move. And then just going racing, I suppose, look, where we're based now, just below Barbary Castle, it's an amazing place just going racing. There's so many courses within 2 hours. And I found that a massive change, just being able to go racing and coming home at a reasonable time and different things like that has made it just so much more pleasurable, and even on the road.
A work-life balance, and that seems to be a theme that you talk about, having good guys at home riding the horses. We see you on the social media. It seems to be a fun place to work, you've mentioned relaxation a couple of times, and you're quite close to Lambourne as well, where you are now. So you make pretty good use of the facilities there, the grass gallops and the schooling facilities there. You spoke about scope to grow. Where are you at now in terms of your scope? You're ambitious, obviously, for more horses, better horses. Do you sort of have in your head a limit as to how many horses you think you can comfortably train? A, where you are, and B, how many you comfortably want to train, in your own right anyway?
Oh, it's like anything. I think nowadays, obviously, to be competitive on those Saturday, you need to have numbers. There's no hiding that fact. The bigger yards are getting bigger. I think to be competitive, you need to have those larger numbers. Look where we are. We're still only licensed for 24 at the moment. There is scope to go a bit further, but I just wanted to make sure we didn't jump too soon. That's just from a staff point of view and probably all those little logistics. Yes, there's room to grow, but I think we're probably another 2 years away from that, realistically. But yeah, it's something I wanted to do over the next probably couple of years, but I'm quite keen not to just go from 0 to 60 in a short period of time. I'd rather let us just grow casually. Well, I say casually grow over the next sort of 2 years and then try and get the numbers up. Look where we are. We got plenty of scope. We've got our own gallops, and there's plenty of room to put more stables when we need them. But yeah, I'm quite happy with where we are at the moment. But hopefully, in the next sort of 2 years, then we'll look to increase the string and just look. We're training more horses this season than we were last season, and we probably would triple from what we were when we started in our first season. So if we can keep going on that sort of trajectory as we are, I'd be quite happy.
And in terms of your MO, I would sort of, and doing this job, I really enjoy it. I enjoy talking racing and sharing opinions, all the rest of it. But it does come sort of with a compromise, and you sometimes feel like you're sort of selling grandmother's sort of recipe for her special pie, And I, having known you through the Welsh point to point scene, I was pretty quick, I think, to pick up on you that you were, if you line one up, you very rarely missed, and voiced that opinion last year. And then, of course, everyone catches on, and I lose a bit of value myself from my own punting. One of the things I sort of noticed about you is, you're very adept at finding the right race. But one of the things I like to do is look through and horses that I'm interested in and see where they're entered up. And very often you'll find that trainers will have horses in 4 or 5 different races. And then I often think if they've discounted 4 and they're running at the 5th one, it's a suggestion that I think this is the right race. That doesn't always tend to be the case with you. I've sort of noticed that compared to other trainers, you don't tend to enter horses in a lot of races. You tend to have them entered up in a race, and that's where they're going. Is that because you are more focused in terms of what you think are the right conditions for your horses, in terms of if they want 2 miles 2, for example, around Southall, they don't need to be entered in 2 mile 4 around Market Rasen, for example? Or is it that you're sort of slightly less worried about the opposition?
Look, it's probably a difficult one, but I enjoy race planning. It's probably my biggest thing that I enjoy doing of the whole job. So, look, we've always got to look outside the box all the time with the horses. The type of horse we've had, I haven't been able to be. And look, it's the cost. I can't send an owner say, "Well, look, there's 5 entries next week. We could go here, there, or anywhere." So there's normally always a plan, and that would probably be an early season plan where we start off. So if I say something, that's where we're going. And if it doesn't come off, then it's on my shoulders, and we can look to do other things. Sometimes I'm not saying there are times, and if I look at and I think there's a weak opportunity, but I think sometimes you can run your horse on the wrong trip on the wrong track just because it's a weak race and get found out. Whereas if you're on the right track and trip, normally you're still going to be competitive. And I kind of did that probably my first season. I was trying to find the weak races all the time, but not necessarily doing the best for the horse. So yeah, that's probably where we are now, and probably the way I think a little bit more on it. And I'm not saying there are some times where if the prize money's good, we'll go. I'm quite keen to support the tracks that have the best prize money, and I think all our owners are as well, because you've got to try and make a little bit of it pay somewhere.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's something I was sort of itching to ask you, actually, because it's something I really noticed. So, final question, and no pressure, but last year you very kindly gave us Titan Discovery for the SBK National Hunt preview, and that worked out really well. And I thought he ran a really solid race on his return at Chepstow, probably ground a little bit quicker than he'd like. And as you said, you perhaps train them to come further down the line. So, I mean, first perhaps we touch on him. What's his sort of plan to stay over hurdles this year?
Yes, he has schooled over fences. I'll be honest, there's such good prize money in that silver trophy for an early season target that I thought, oh, look, we'll have a go, but it's probably the wrong ground for him. A little bit, it was probably a little bit early. And look, he's £20 higher from what he started from this time last year, so it's obviously going to be difficult to come out all guns blazing first time up. Yeah, he'll go. I would have thought he'd go back to Sandown. I think it's the 10th of November. Look, he's done well around that course. He'll be much further forward on his second run for us. Yeah, look, he'll probably stay over hurdles now this season. I still think there might be a class 2 in him somewhere along the lines, off the mark he is currently, because he was very solid last season. He didn't miss a beat, and he ran pretty much every sort of 2-3 weeks. He was on the box and going racing for a young horse in his first season hurdling. He was plenty busy enough, so he'll have a few more. There's a couple of targets later on in the spring with him, but yeah, if we can nick 1 or 2 along the way, that'll be great with him, because look, he's probably still our best horse and most unexposed still a little bit. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of the season.
And so to follow on with that, who would be the sort of, I don't like asking trainers for winners, because I think it puts pressure on, and B, you've got owners to satisfy. But if there's a horse in the yard that you're sort of excited to see what they can do this year, who would that be? And then the follow up to that, and brownie points for thinking more left field and not saying Constitution Hill, which would be the horse outside of your yard that you think might be sort of have scope to improve and potentially be interesting to follow?
Ooh, right. Well, probably one in the yard. There is. Just trying to think what we got. There is a new filly actually. We haven't had too long, called Gotthereintheend. She's a full sister to Kerry Hill, who won the Grade 2 last year. I think she might be one that could be progressive later on in the season. We are going to step her up in trip. She has been placed. Look, she's only got a low handicap mark, and I'll be honest, she's not one that's ripping up the gallops or anything like that at the moment. But she might be one probably later on in the season when we step her up in trip. She's got a nice pedigree and just a nice type of mare for those mares races. And look, she got the bonus of a handicap mark to start with, so she's probably the one. And then another horse from outside of our yard, I'm probably looking forward to watching Sir Gino go this year. Like, I thought he looked a monster last year, and obviously Mr. Henderson's horses weren't quite right all season, so I think he could be one that could set him alight.
And if you were going to put money on it, do you think he'll go fences, or do you think he'll stay hurdling? What would your gut instinct be?
I'd love to see him over a fence. I would. I just think he's the right age. I haven't seen him as a physical in real life, but he looked the type with plenty of scope to go and jump a fence. So I think the market was shortened somewhere the other day. Was it for the Arkle? Yeah, he'd be one I'd quite like to see over
Robbie,
a fence anyway.
Thanks ever so much for your time. I'm not going to keep you much longer. I know you've got nappy duty to get to, horses to check. But look, best of luck for the season. I hope you can kick on, and even if you don't get the same numbers, satisfy yourself that you're still projecting forwards to where you want to be. Thanks very much, and best of luck.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Ross. Thank you.
So that's it for episode 3 of Miller's Movers. Thanks very much to Robbie Llewlyn for his time. I thought there were some really insightful nuggets there as to how he finds the races. Certainly horses to follow that need to go into your tracker. I'll be back next week where we'll review the Charlie Hall Chase from Wetherby. In the meantime, good luck with your punting, and I'll see you next week.